Hello, and welcome to the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group Biweekly Sync. It is October 8th, 2020. Very excited to have you all with us today. We've got another great call, and let's go over our agenda real quick. Updates on SharePoint Framework. We got our Patterns and Practices program updates, new community sample updates. We'll do our picture time and together mode, and then we've got 3 great demos again from Vardhaman, Daniel, and Ryan. So very excited to get to those. So with that, we're going to try and jump through the intro pretty quickly here. I always like to cover opportunities to participate in Patterns and Practices or this call or any of the other Patterns and Practices PnP offerings. So for this call, really encourage anybody out there who's interested in doing a demo on whatever technology, whatever stack, but we like it to be, for this call, client-side oriented. So that could be SPFx Web Parts, application customizers, anything else you're creating there. And of course, always great to see any of the @PnP offerings included in those demos, whether that's the CLI, Reusable Controls, the Yeoman Generator, or PMPjs. Love to see that. I think the demos continue to be the most valuable part of this call, and something I know I learn from every week and see new techniques and new capabilities people are using. So as well, we of course encourage you and welcome you to contribute on GitHub. So reporting any issues you might find. We don't love issues, but we love hearing about them. That's how we can get them fixed. Submitting pull requests. All of our Patterns and Practices repositories encourage and welcome you to contribute through pull requests. Those could fix issues, add new functionality, or just even simply documentation updates. Everything helps. Everything is appreciated. And of course, if you see other folks with questions you might happen to know the answer, be able to help them, please do. Feel free to jump in, help them with their questions and issues. That's a great way for all of us to help each other and people get their answers a little bit faster than perhaps waiting for folks on the core team to get to those questions. And then finally, we encourage you to give us feedback. How are these calls going? How is our documentation? Where else can we help? And of course, positive feedback is okay too. If there's something we are doing that you are very much a fan of, let us know, and we can perhaps do a little bit more of that. This slide here is going to cover all of our links. So we've got links to our developer videos, links to our community videos, open source repositories. That includes the Microsoft Graph repository, Office Dev, PnP, and SharePoint. Encourage you to check all of those out. All of those are looking for contributions and people to participate. Sample galleries, tons and tons and tons of amazing samples. I know I use these as a reference for a lot of the stuff I'm working on, and I hope all of you are as well. Tons of great stuff there. And then the open source initiatives and samples, aka MS M365 PnP, is your one-stop link, and that'll link you out to all of these other resources. So that's a great landing page for all things PnP, aka MS M365 PnP, and link down there at the bottom, SharePoint Framework documentation, specifically at aka.ms/SPFx. And David.
Thank you. All right, everybody. So the Patterns and Practices community, as you likely well know, is completely open source, which means that we welcome contributions in all areas of the PnP resources and tools. But we also understand that the process of making those contributions can come with some confusing barriers around the use of GitHub and exactly understanding what that contribution landscape looks like. So the Sharing is Caring initiative helps by providing everyone that would like to join hands-on, step-by-step guidance in live small group session settings. So we have multiple session topics. You can see a first-time contributor session, community doc session for different dates and times, including APAC times. So hopefully that helps meet the needs of everyone's scheduling requirements around the globe. It's also worth noting that this is not a developer-only opportunity. As I noted, those first 2 sessions, which cover first-time contributors and community docs, are fantastic sessions for everyone and anyone looking to begin that contribution journey. We also understand, though, that even consuming some of the resources, such as the SPFx Samples, CLI, and other projects, can be a little overwhelming and confusing with all of the moving parts, such as GitHub, the open source tools, etc. So we're starting to provide more sessions how to take advantage of getting started using the various PnP resources. You can register for any or all the sessions at aka.ms/sharingiscaring. And again, they're all completely free of charge, so please don't hesitate to join. Safe spaces to ask lots of questions and learn lots about how to get more involved. Back to you, Patrick.
Awesome, thank you for that. I do definitely check that out. If you're looking for ways to get started or have questions, that's a great forum to have a little bit of a smaller group and ask questions and get started with contributing not just to PnP, but those skills, of course, transferable to any other GitHub project that you might want to participate in. And do want to mention as well, Hacktoberfest 2020, the PnP repositories will be participating in this. So this is something, my understanding is put on by DigitalOcean, Intel, and others around encouraging people to participate. So you can submit 4 pull requests in October, register on the Hacktoberfest site, and get a free t-shirt or plant a tree. And aligned with the Sharing is Caring initiative, it's a great way to get started contributing and give you a little bit of extra motivation there to get started. And with that, I'll hand things over to Vesa for our SharePoint Framework update.
Yeah, excellent. Nothing too much on here. I just updated quickly the stats. We're seeing a massive uptake again on the SharePoint Framework usage in the autumn. As you can see, the last few months and weeks, we can see that the curve is getting higher and higher, which is obviously awesome. A lot of that curve, by the way, is also SharePoint Framework targeting Microsoft Teams. So a lot of people, ISVs and customers, it's great to see that they're starting to use the SharePoint Framework-based Microsoft Teams tabs and personal application because you can easily build them using Microsoft Teams extensibility. Just a quick recap on the key areas where we're investing. Nothing new changes in here since the 2 weeks ago when we went through this one, but there's a lot of performance investments. There's a store investments and Microsoft Teams being really the focus area for the SharePoint Framework as well. So don't get fooled. Even though the name is called SharePoint Framework, that it's only for SharePoint, it is for Microsoft Teams and SharePoint as well. But it's being hosted by the SharePoint for Microsoft Teams for free, and automatically that's why it's still SharePoint Framework. But that's all from my side, so let's jump back, Patrick, to you.
Great, thanks, Vesa. There we go. So we'll get into the PMPjs client-side updates. 2.0.11 was released on October, or sorry, scheduled to be released on October 9th. That is tomorrow. So we'll have some documentation updates there, graph typings updates to the latest version, as well as some beta endpoint changes for term sets. So as that endpoint continues to evolve, we continue to evolve our calling of it. As well, I want to announce we've got a beta out there for 2.1.0. Encourage people to try that. It's a lot of changes that should be mostly invisible to everybody consuming the library, but we've added the ability to have isolated runtimes. So you can have SP objects or graph objects with calling separate sites all within your code. So previously our configuration was global across the entire library, and we've made some changes so that can be isolated now. That's been an oft asked for feature and one that we just haven't been able to put any energy behind until now. So really do ask for you, if you have a chance, try out that beta, let us know the feedback. A lot of changes, so we want to make sure that we're not breaking anybody. It should be fully backwards compatible, so nobody should have to change their code to use this, but should open up some new opportunities there. Please do socialize and follow us at M365PMPjs on Twitter, and of course, as always, please direct all your feedback to the issues list. That just makes sure we can properly track it to resolution. And as well, pnp.github.io/PMPjs for your docs. CLI for Microsoft 365. So released for version 3.1 with retrieving and moving emails, Power Apps, Microsoft 365 service messages, historical Microsoft 365 service status, as well as removing the Knowledge Hub sites. I want to welcome Mark as a new maintainer and encourage all of you to check out the CLI. It is a great project and is also a fantastic way to get started contributing because a lot of the tasks are laid out for you in the issues list, as well are a little bit more atomic than some of the other libraries. You can work on a specific command very easily there. So encourage you to check out the CLI if you haven't checked that out yet. npm install-g at pnp/CLI Microsoft 365 to install that. The reusable controls, we've got the React Controls 2.0 is out and the Property Controls 2.0 is out. So those are now using the Office UI Fabric v6, improvements to the file picker, a few bug fixes, and for migration from v1, there's 2 links there to help you get migrated over to the new set of controls. Encourage you to check those out in your projects. It's a great way to save yourself some time and get a fantastic user experience that is aligned to the out-of-the-box styling and functionality as much as possible. Finally, modern search. So we're working to build a modern search experience with flexible web parts. So V3 3.15.3 is available. That's the September 2020 release. That is another dot release, but it is working on a lot of regression testing, really solidifying things up. So appreciate seeing that out. And as well, V4 work is beginning on this. So some highlights there about a lot of plugin architecture for templating and search backend with Graph Search. Getting rid of some of the existing custom renderers and replacing some of the web components. Also, encourage you to check out PnP Modern Search Web Parts. So a great way to build up a modern search portal using a bunch of flexible web parts, and as well a great place to contribute if you're interested. And PnP SPFx Samples, Hugo, take it away.
Thank you. So the PnP SPFx sample repositories are a great way to get you started on projects by providing you sample code built by an inclusive community. So we welcome everyone, and we encourage a positive attitude and helping each other. We want those sample repositories to become really the first step that every developer takes when they start a new solution. The updates that we have here are the updates for the last 2 weeks, but just to save some time, I'm not going to go through every single one of them. We have one new extension by Alex Trentiev, which demonstrates how to use the file type renderer PnP Reusable Control. And on the web parts side, we have a new World Clocks web part by Jerry Essier, which is inspired by the SharePoint Starter Kit. We also have a new Outlook add-in, which allows you to create to-do tasks from emails from Luis Menez. And a new accordion. We have a lot of accordion samples, but new accordion sample from Jerry Essier, as well as another extension, Outlook extension, that allows you to save attachments from an email. And finally, João Mendes has added new custom links web part that allows you to add new links to the web part and customize the look and feel, color, font size, height and width, and things like that. I'd like to thank Jerry, Alex, Ryan, Bo, Louis, Ravi, Akash, Joel, and Joao for contributing this month, and we look forward to more contributions from everyone. That's it for me, Patrick. Back to you.
Awesome, thank you for that. And I want to give a shout out to Hugo. I asked him yesterday if we had a Google Analytics sample, and he said not only do we have a Google Analytics sample, he completely updated it to the latest SharePoint framework yesterday. So fantastic work from Hugo, not just on that, but on running all of this, the sample program here and keeping things really up to date. So fantastic work, Hugo. Thank you for all that you do in the sample space. And with that, we are on to our optional picture time. So if you are interested and would like, you can turn on your camera. We're going to do a together mode picture. Everybody that's interested.
Starting. Oh, we can see. Good.
There's some people.
A few people already. I think we get more and more people here. Hopefully the picture is getting slightly better. Why is it so? It's not precise. What's wrong? What's wrong? People are waving. I'm going to take one picture out of that already. I need to get more clarity on the picture. I think we're hitting the limit. Good. Everybody is waving. No idea why. Oh, now it's getting actually better. Much better quality. Somebody has a really big hand. So, and one more. Everybody's waving. Yay! Excellent. Cool. I think we are hitting the 50 limit there. Thank you. That's all from the picture side. I will share the picture in a second. So let's move on. Thank you, everybody.
I think I saw somebody's daughter sneak into the picture. That's awesome to see.
Realities of working remotely.
No, love it. Get them interested young. So now we are going to the demos. And so Vardhaman, if you want to go ahead and take over, I think you are up first.
Yeah, let me share my screen. All right, so hi everyone. My name is Vardhaman Deshpande. I'm an Office Development MVP, and I currently work with Valo on the Teams product, Teams-based product where we're using SPFx, where we're using bots. So recently I've been involved in a lot of that space. And on this demo, on this call, we'll go through something called Teams messaging extensions and Teams task modules powered by SPFx. Now, I wrote a blog post a couple of weeks ago, and in that we talk about specifically messaging extensions and SPFx. Now after that, we decided to kind of agree on coming on the call, and then I realized that it's not just a messaging extensions. It's basically task modules, and anywhere task modules can be presented in Teams, you can do that with SPFx. You can have SPFx Web Part come up as task modules. So I will follow this up with a blog post with more details. So the demo we are going to see today is actually has a couple of more things than the blog post. So, and then I'll follow it up with another post, and then potentially I will push all of this to the PnP Samples repo as well, so that all of us can take advantage of this. Now, we will be talking about messaging extensions and task modules. So first, let's see what messaging extensions are. Now, the messaging extensions basically help you execute custom code or custom logic within the context of, or without leaving the context of Teams. So it could be that you invoke that logic on messages which are already posted in Teams from this ellipsis menu, going to more actions. And then you can have certain tasks show up there. Messaging extensions can also be brought up from the command bar. And lastly, messaging extensions can also be brought up from the compose bar. Like, for example, the praise applications, which is in Teams, is a messaging extension, sorry. And similarly, you can use SPFx Web Parts, which show up as messaging extensions as well. Now, first talk about the message actions or the messaging extensions, which are invoked on messages posted already in Teams. So I'll go to the ellipsis menu, I'll go to more actions, and I'll invoke the messaging extensions, and the SharePoint Framework Web Part can be brought up as part of that. Now, where do we configure this? There's two types of ways in which you can configure a messaging extensions. First is the Teams manifest. In a Teams manifest, you have the compose extensions section. Inside that, you can set up your messaging extension. There's two types of extensions, static and dynamic. First, we'll have a look at the static extensions, where you can configure the entire task module options or task module properties right from the Teams app. So you can see that the Teams, the SPFx URL is configured here. And the way to kind of decide whether the extension is a static one or a dynamic one is using this fetch task property, where if you set that as false, then Teams is going to see if you have a task module defined as part of your manifest. In that task module, in the SPFx URL, a couple of important things to note: that it's not the same as the SPFx tab-based URL. There is a different ASPX page behind the scenes, Teams task hosted app, and then the other information is more or less similar, where you specify the component ID of the SPFx web part, and then the SPFx task module shows up. Now, the one good thing about this approach is that you don't need to do a lot with Teams bots and stuff. You just create the manifest, you deploy the SPFx web part, you configure the task module over here, and then you can see that the web part starts working within Teams after the app is installed. Now, when we invoke this extension, you can see that in the SPFx context, there is already a lot of information available, like what was the team on which the extension was invoked, the channel ID, on which particular message did you invoke it. But there is not a lot, there's not all the information which we might need. For example, we might need the message body. So this information is not available by default on the SPFx side. So let me go to the SPFx web part. And this is a normal boilerplate SPFx Web Part without React, without any framework. So just to demo the pure code. So you can see that inside the Teams context, inside the SPFx context, it's the Teams context, and you have the various properties available already called group ID, channel ID, and chat ID. Now, when we invoke the messaging extension, there is this thing called parent message ID as well. We will fetch that. And from there, then to get more details about the message, you can then use the Graph API. So the Graph Teams API lets you fetch all the details about a message or a chat message or a channel. So just having this ID available as part of the SPFx context gives you some data, which then you can use to fetch even more relevant data. Now, one thing about this is that we have to depend a little bit on what properties are available out of the box within the SPFx context. Now, I came across a slight limitation where, as you can see, this is a top-level message. I will invoke the static message extension, and then when fetching the body, we'll get the message body. Now, when I invoke the same extension on a reply, at that time, the parent message ID property keeps pointing at the top level message, and you can see that the body is still being fetched for the top level message. So, and then I knew that whenever we work with Teams bots and Teams messaging extensions, there is a lot of data which is sent from Teams to the bot. So just a sample of that data you can see on the Microsoft Docs files that this data is basically everything which the bot behind the scenes receives. So you have the ID of the messages on which it was invoked. You have even the client of the team, like whether it was a desktop client, whether it was the web client, whether it was a mobile client, and so on. And then you have a lot of channel data. Now, I knew that one of these properties was the ID of the reply on this. So then that kind of leads to the other type of messaging extension, which was the dynamic messaging extension. Now, the way you configure the dynamic extension is like this, where you define the fetch task as true. That means that Teams is going to go and talk to the configured bot, which is this bot. It's going to say that, do you have a fetch task for me to return? And so it's not going to look for the task info object, which is configured in the manifest itself. So I think this is a slightly more flexible approach, but then it has a kind of a on you having a bot configured behind the scenes, and inside that then you have much more options. So all the data which you saw here which is sent to the bot from Teams is accessible in a strongly typed way inside the bot. Now I'm using a .NET bot configured, but then you could use a Node.js bot or any other platform as well, which has the bot framework SDK. Now inside here, we are going to get the reply ID as well as the ID of the message. And then we're going to do the exact same thing, which is we are going to configure the SPFx URL, and then we are going to pass the stuff which we need as parameters to SPFx, which is using the message ID and the reply to ID. So this is the exact same thing, but done in the backend way, where we get more parameters from the bot framework and we pass those parameters to SPFx. Inside SPFx, again, we look at the query string parameters. And then once we get the query string parameters, we'll again use the same graph calls to get the data as well. So to show that, if I go in here and invoke the dynamic messaging extensions here, this sends the message to the bot behind the scenes. The bot fetches the required information, and then it gives us the correct message ID, and then it gives us the correct text of the message as well. So those are basically the two types: static messaging extensions and dynamic ones. Speaking of task modules are not only limited in messaging actions. So you can even bring up a task module from the compose box. So just like you saw, You can bring up SPFx Web Part as part of from the compose box as well. Now here the chat ID, message body will be empty because it's not on a message where we are executing this. You still get the same context like the team ID and channel ID, and then you can invoke certain third-party services, or you can do anything basically. Whatever you can do from SPFx, you can do in a task module. And then another place I find personally is from adaptive cards. So you have adaptive cards posted in Teams where you have a slightly fancier message. Maybe there is a third-party app which is posting these adaptive cards. As part of the SPFx, or sorry, as part of the adaptive card buttons, you can have SPFx task modules open up as well, and you can have the same kind of context information available there. So yeah, speaking of coming back to messaging extensions, as I mentioned, there's two types, the static ones and the dynamic ones. The dynamic ones require you to do a bit more work with the bot behind the scenes. If you have lots of complex logic, if you need immediately all the data which is available as bot framework, then the dynamic approach is probably better. But if you just want to get started, if you want to see how your SPFx web part looks inside task modules, there's obviously the static ones where you just configure the URL in the Teams manifest, and then it should start working in Teams. So it's easy to get started, but like if you want more control over your messaging extension and task modules with SPFx, the dynamic one with the bot is probably the right way to go in that scenario. And then SPFx supports calling Graph API using AAD clients, and you can do everything you want inside the task modules then. So just another way in which SPFx can be surfaced inside Teams, in addition to tabs and personal apps. Yeah, that's it about the demo.
Question, yes. Because I know that you're implementing this within Valo as well, and this isn't really intended to promote Valo's products, but more on, can you explain the scenarios and where you've been using this within your implementation? So what would be the scenario where people would be using this kind of a messaging extension in first place? Because there's questions around that.
Yeah, sure. So just to give you an example of Valo specifically, so I work on the ideation product where employees are kind of promoted, or rather employees are encouraged to submit their ideas. So one of the things which we do is we allow the Teams tab, or sorry, the Teams message to be promoted as an idea, like from the messaging extensions. I'm not sure if I have the app working right now, but just to give an example that what you could kind of promote someone posts something in Teams, and then you could promote that as an idea throughout the tenant. So promoting messages, then creating some things like forms and stuff right from the compose box, which then gives you the option to do that with SPFx as well, with the compose extension. So without leaving the context of Teams, if you want to work with Teams data in your third-party application, I think this is a great scenario. Sorry, before I forget, I'm showing all of this as an example within the Teams channel, but this works in group chats as well. Like for example, if I'm part of a group chat, I can bring up the same messaging extensions to it. So you don't have to be in the context of a team if you can execute third-party logic as part of a group chat or a personal chat with someone as well. Doesn't have to be in a Teams channel.
Excellent, thanks, Vardhaman. So yeah, really good clarification on the use case, because that's always the key point, is to understand where would I actually use the capability, not just how do I use the API or implement things. So really, really great stuff. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Patrick, I think it's Daniel next, isn't it?
It is indeed. Daniel, you are up. If you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Daniel Watford. I'm a software consultant in the UK with my company, Watford Consulting. We provide software development and system integration services to help customers modernize processes. I've been building software for about 20 years embedded in enterprise systems, but only came to SharePoint about 5 years ago. I really quite liked how it took care of a lot of the busy work. Things like access control, storage, and search are all ready to go. Come forward a few more years, and I find SharePoint has just got easier to work with SharePoint Online, the framework, and PMPjs helping us with solution development. So today, I'd like to demonstrate a web part I've created for the SharePoint framework, which will help explore the relationship between users and groups in SharePoint and the Azure Active Directory. So, as an example of where we might want to better understand users and groups in SharePoint, we can take a look at a simple solution to process purchase orders. In this list, we'll create rules specifying the maximum purchase order value that a member of staff is allowed to approve. If a staff member submits a purchase order with a higher value than the solution the solution will then pass the purchase order up the management chain as an approval request. Once the purchase order is approved, relevant notifications can then be automatically sent to other departments such as finance and purchasing. Each rule applies to multiple users and groups specified using a person or group column. For display purposes, I've added an additional column to the list with some formatting to show the IDs for those users and groups that have been selected. These are the site users and site group IDs that we'll explore in this talk. So the solution needs to determine if a purchase order limit rule applies to a particular user. To do that, we'll need to find all the IDs used to identify the user and their groups on the site. In other words, there are multiple identities, and then match those against the IDs stored in the rule. So what are SharePoint site users and site groups? So here we have two users, AAD user 1 and AAD user 2, along with two groups, AAD group 1 and AAD group 2. Normally, we think of users and groups at the organizational level, managed using tools like Azure AD, like the Azure AD portal or the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. These same organization users and groups are available in the SharePoint site where we can refer to them in people or group columns or assign roles to them. But once the site needs to refer to a user or group, it doesn't continue to reference it by any sort of Azure AD identifier. Instead, it maintains its own list of site users mapped from those Azure AD security principles. An important thing to note is that the Azure AD security groups are mapped to a SharePoint site as site users, not site groups. SharePoint site groups are created and managed on the SharePoint site. Site users, including those mapped AD groups, can be assigned as members of a site group. Here I have a bunch of users. This diagram shows the users and security groups defined in my Azure AD for my tenant. The arrows indicate that Diego, Alex, Adele, and Isaiah are members of some security groups. Within the same tenant, on my demo SharePoint site, I have defined two SharePoint site groups, SP Group 1 and SP Group 2. Grady and AD Group 1 and AD Group 2 have been assigned as members of those site groups. Assigning those memberships has caused creation of AD Group 1, AD Group 2, and Grady site users. Adele, Henrietta, and AD Group 4 have been assigned read permissions on the site directly, causing the creation of their corresponding site users. So note that Alex, Diego, and Isaiah do not have corresponding SharePoint site users. Their only relation to the SharePoint site is through their direct or indirect relationship of AD Group memberships of AD Group 1 and AD Group 4. So let's take a look at how these users and group memberships can be surfaced by the user and group information web parts. Over to the demo. So here we are at the homepage of my demo SharePoint site. We're on the SharePoint site. We have the user and group information web part already installed. The web part defaults to displaying information for the current user. So here we can see my user's Azure AD information from the Graph API and my SharePoint site user information from the SharePoint API, both retrieved using PMPjs. So let's go ahead and select a site user. Here we see our three test users, Adele, Grady, and Henrietta, alongside my own user, and then some system users. Let's choose Adele, and then under group information, we can see that Adele is known to the SharePoint site as the Adele Advanced Principal, which has a principal type of user. Adele site user is not a member of any SharePoint site groups. We also see that Adele is a member of Active Directory Groups 1 and Group 2. The site users representing these organizational level groups have the security group principal type and are themselves members of SharePoint site group 1 and SharePoint site group 2. Let's have a look at Henrietta next. So here we can see that Henrietta is only recognized by by the site as a Henrietta Muella user principal type. She is not recognized as a member of any organization groups from Azure AD or any SharePoint site groups. Let's have another look at Grady. So Grady is recognized by the Grady Archie user principal type, and that user principal is a member of the SharePoint SP Group 1 site group. Rather than selecting from existing sites, a user and group information web part can also search for users defined in Active Directory. So we can give this a try by searching for Diego. Since Diego is not a site user, I'll just whiz back here. No. Since he's not a site user, there is no SharePoint site user information to display. However, he can still be identified by the site as a member of AD Group 1 with the security group principal type, and also via the AD Group's membership of site group SP Group 1. Now we'll take a look at Alex. So like Diego, we can see that Alex is not a site user. Alex can be recognized by the site as AD Group 1 with a security group principal type, even though he's not a direct member of that organizational group. So here we see that Alex is a member of AD Group 3, which is a nested member of AD Group 1. SharePoint's not aware of AD Group 3 at all. Now we'll have a look at Isaiah. In Isaiah's case, we see that it's only recognized by the site due to his membership of AD Group 4. We can also use the user and group info web part to look at user and group profile information. So if we go back to Adele, we can click on the various IDs, principal names and site groups to access her profile pages. So for instance, we'll click on Adele's user principal, we'll get taken to her Delve profile. If we click on one of her AD groups, we'll get taken to a user information page. So this, I think, hopefully demonstrates that we're actually looking at a site user rather than a site group in the case of Active Directory groups. And then if we go and click on the SharePoint site group, we'll go and see the members list for that site group. Now we're going to take a look at the code. The user and group information web part is implemented using the React framework. Its top-level React component is a function called user and group info, which holds the top-level state for the web part. This state consists of references to two lookup services, one for accessing Azure AD and one for accessing SharePoint. It also stores state for the currently selected user's email address and/or site ID, and then it also tracks whether a user is currently selected at all. The only place that state is updated is in the onSelectedUserChanged callback in response to selection of a site user or searching for an organization user. These state changes will cause components to be re-rendered with new data. User and group information is rendered using child components, user info, and user group memberships. Hopefully you can see down here in the left, this is the area of the screen that's going to be rendered by those components. Both child components also take the web parts context, but this is only used for populating those links we saw that took us to the Delve profile or to the group membership profile pages we looked at the end of the demo. The user selection component rendered at the top of the page takes the web parts context, the SharePoint user group lookup service, and the callback. That's down here. The context and the lookup service are used by the people picker control to search for users in a tenant and to retrieve the list of site users to be selected from. The callback is called whenever a new user is selected. Moving on to the user info component. The user info component is a React functional component which includes two promises in its properties returned from the SharePoint and Azure AD lookup services. As each of these promises resolve, the two sections, users Azure AD information and SharePoint site user information, will be rendered just about here. As each of the promises, the Azure AD promise is created by the Azure AD lookup services getAAD user function. This function includes some basic caching using maps, should probably be swapped out for a proper caching library. But the main work of calling the graph API is done by the PMPjs library for us. Here we call two different methods depending on whether an email address has been supplied. If no address is supplied, we'll assume that the current user's information is wanted. The SharePoint user group lookup service enables us to retrieve site user information for a site with the given site user ID. Although not needed for rendering the user info component, the lookup service also goes and retrieves group information for the site user. We do that so that we can cache it for use later when we're rendering the bottom part of the screen. Once again, we use PMPjs to call the SharePoint API. The user group memberships component rendered at the bottom of the web part. Its properties include a promise to return an array of SP group membership objects. These objects define the relationship between a site group and a site user. By permitting the site group's details to be undefined, in these objects, we can represent cases where a user is known to SharePoint, but their user principal is not a member of any site groups. Here we can see the get user memberships function from the SharePoint user group lookup service, which returns a promise of SP group membership objects we saw in the previous slide. Using the given site user ID, this function will retrieve the SP group membership objects that describe the given site user's membership of site groups. Then any Azure AD groups the user is a member of are retrieved by this next line, mapped to the corresponding site users, and then checked for membership of site groups as well. The results of these two steps are merged together and returned in the resolve promise. So let's take a look at the get SP user memberships method, which finds any site group memberships for the given site user ID. First of all, the function calls and awaits the get SP user and members group promise, which we saw earlier. This retrieves the site user information based on the given site user ID, along with the site group membership information that we cached. You can see I've had to do a little bit of casting here to try and get access to the iSite group info array. I'm sure there's a nicer way to do this, so any pull requests gratefully received. Depending on whether the user has been found on the site and whether it's a member of any site groups, we'll either return 0, 1, or multiple SP group membership objects. And now we'll look at how the Azure AD groups are mapped to site users and checked for site group memberships. This logic is handled by the populate AAD groups as SP users function, which, using the given email address, retrieves the GUIDs of the Azure AD groups that the user is a member of. So here we can see recording graph.usersGetById, and we'll return an array of GUIDs. The array of GUIDs is then used to build a filter, which we can then select site users corresponding to the user's Azure AD groups. For every found site user, we then call the same get SP user memberships function that we called earlier, constructing our array of SP group membership objects. So now we get back to the original problem for the purchase order solution. Using this last piece of code, we can now retrieve an array of all the site user and group IDs for a member of staff. So armed with these IDs, it's now possible to examine the rules in the purchase order limits list and filter those which apply to a particular staff member. So that concludes this demonstration on the user and group information web part. At this linked, I mentioned some properties about site user and site group IDs and how it appears they might be stored in a single list on the site. But for now, thanks for watching, and please feel free to get in touch with me if you have any questions.
Thank you, Daniel. Really great presentation there, really thorough. A lot of great comments there in the chat. So really appreciate you doing that today. Outstanding to see those techniques. And Ryan, I think you are up next if you're ready to go.
Yep, says it's sharing.
Take it away.
Cool. All right. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ryan Scouten. I've been involved with the PnP community for a few years. Changed jobs, had to take a hiatus from meetings just due to being in the middle of my commute. One of the things I can definitely say I'm thankful for about the coronavirus is lack of commute. So I actually get to be involved in some of these things now. So, and also because that has allowed me to kind of devote some more time to contributing with the community. So looking at some of the pull requests, well, the issues, and said, hey, how can I help out? And one of the things that came up was the React list form web part sample. It's been around, as we can see on here. It's been a sample for almost 3 years now. There's a couple issues that were listed, so I started working on fixing it and was talking with Hugo and figured, hey, this is kind of an older one, so it'd be good to kind of remind people that this thing still exists. So what is this? The React list form web part is a React-based web part that allows you to be able to point it at a list and it'll generate the list form. Now that could be an edit form, a display form, or a new form. And it's just a regular web part. So as we can see here from the information page for this sample, it has a animated GIF with the different pieces that it's got and the functionality. We can look at it. There's a lot of different things. Some of the stuff that I added was most recently was adding in the ability for multi-user taxonomy and taxonomy multi-field types. And we'll look at this in a bit. And then also working on an issue currently for cascading dropdowns for lookups. So if we look at this web part, we can go in. I'm going to add this guy to the site. You can scroll down. It is just called list form. And so when you come in, fairly basic, we can click on configure, give it a name. And then we need to give it a list to point at. So for this first demo, I am going to use test list form. And then we specify whether we want it to be new, we want it to be edit. In this case, I'm going to go with edit just so we can kind of see what that looks like. So if I set it to edit, by default, it doesn't know which item you need to load. So there's a query string parameter. And in this case, I'm just using item ID equals 2. So in the configuration, I just need to tell it what query string parameter to get the ID of the item we want to edit from. So I can say item ID, and now it changes over. So there also is the option, because this doesn't quite support all field types yet. We're working on those as people need them. But if you want to, you can also check the show unsupported. And before the request I was working on, the user fields and taxonomy fields would not show up until you told it to show unsupported. Also, one of the cool things you can do is after you're done doing an edit, so whether it's a new or you're doing an update to an existing item, you can redirect them to another page. So for example, I could redirect them to a details page, say, hey, thank you for submitting your form. And then I can also do their placeholders that allow you to specify, hey, here is the ID of the item that was either edited or added. So you can actually include that in some other things in your process flow. So the cool part about this is we have the ability to edit. These are the fields that exist on the list. So for example, we have here a date picker that includes, most of these are using the React controls also from the community. We can clear this out. So we have a people field where I can find myself, search for it. Also for taxonomy, we had the ability to go through and select some different locations. And groups, this is just a group-based filtering, kind of testing through the different scenarios as we're going through it, making sure it only returns people that are in the group that's specified. And then when we're done, I can go ahead and also add an attachment, and then I can hit save. Now, since I haven't really configured to go anyplace else, we get just a message that says item saved successfully, and then that goes away. One of the things I have realized is there also is the ability to move these controls, so it is drag and droppable. But as you'll notice, one of the things, as I was doing my testing yesterday, for whatever reason in the current version, it doesn't work. Also with there are some icons over here. The top one is to move the field, and this one is to remove it. Say you don't want to show a specific field. You'll also notice the remove button does actually work, but the icons are not working. So as you can see, these are just community samples. So there are things that are beneficial that may or may not be working. These particular items I noticed don't have an issue created for them. I will probably just go ahead and submit one and work on it, but just kind of, those type of things are there. So for this particular one, if we switch to another list, it just changes up the types of information. So I do have test cascading, just to kind of show you some of the stuff that's being worked on. So in this scenario, working on being able to cascade down from one lookup field to another, because a lot of times we do parent-child relationships. So in this case, I've got it set up to test a multi-select. So on this one, I have selected projects 1 and 2. And in our subfields, we have child elements that correspond. So we have project 1.1, 2.1, and then subproject, so on and so forth. Now, if I come back up to the main project field, I can come here and uncheck project. This switches down to just project 2. And also the other, as you can see, the other fields have now changed that we don't have any of the project 1 options anymore. Also, if I select down, those are the only ones there. If I uncheck everything, still working on work in progress on to make sure we get all the fields, but this is the entire list. So if I come in and I can select project 1, 2, and 3, we can see our values come back, plus we also get to see some of the other options. So it does work with the cascading and making sure everything matches, and then carrying on with that. So for the most part, that's a fairly simple project. In case anybody wants to work with it, if you're coming in, you want to work with a sample, there are a number of fields. Your main point is going to be with the list form. But if we look at it, there are a bunch of different form fields that help handle the rendering. So we've got attachment fields, we've got Boolean, choice, date, lookup, numbers, rich text, URL fields, user fields, and I remember if I mentioned taxonomy or not, but all of these are fairly basic. So if we come into the taxonomy field, for example, we have a control, and then it's just using the SharePoint Framework React Controls community project to be able to use the taxonomy picker that's associated with it. So not a lot of involvement is required to make updates to this. If you want to say, hey, there's this field type that I want to go in and I want to add to it. It's fairly simple to add these in, and then there is a mapping file that coordinates the changes to, so if you add in a new field type, it'll map from the actual field type to the. Also, this one does lend itself fairly well for a regular page. So I can come in, add this guy here. Same experience, pick the list. And we'll just say new in this scenario. So I come in, this is demo item. Uh-oh. Let's just go ahead and save this just in case something's in a funky state. Okay, project 3 does not. Wow. All right, obviously I identified a bug here. So we'll just switch it back to edit then. Nothing like live coding demos. So we can save this guy, and we're ready to roll. And so I can add in an attachment and change things up. So as you can see, a lot of the involvement with the community projects are not super involved. There's some basic adding in some functionality saying, hey, I know how to work with this type of data. Let me kind of contribute and add those in. And that's what I've got. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And I'll hand it back over.
Fantastic. Thank you for that demo. And thank you to Vardhaman, Daniel, and Ryan. Great demos from all of you. Really excited to see those demos every week. Outstanding work. If you would like to demo, please, again, just reach out to myself or Vesa, and we will get you scheduled for an upcoming call. So thank you. Recording will be available in 24 hours on the SharePoint Community YouTube channel. Check that out. Follow us on Twitter, M365Dev, M365PMP. Our next SPFx call will be in 2 weeks on October 22nd. And our next general dev call will be next Thursday, October 15th. We'll have our October monthly community call, on October 13th. That is, I believe, next Tuesday.
Patrick, I need to jump on there because I completely promoting that. You have Pandinelli and coming up on that call to talk about latest on SPFx, and then one of the Andrew, who's in my team as well in the engineering, talk about the performance and Project Nucleus, which is actually the completely offline way of handling SharePoint, and that will have an extensibility options as well. So, for example, the list data and lists and all of that. So that's happening on next Tuesday in our monthly community call. So sorry for jumping there, Patrick, but making sure that we're promoting that. Really cool stuff.
I had no idea. So great to hear that. That'll be a really fun and informative session, as always, with the folks that really shape what SharePoint or SharePoint Framework is and will become. So great to hear from them on the call. Fantastic they're able to make it. Lots of great, as well, developer community calls out there on Adaptive Cards, Microsoft Graph, Identity Platform, Teams, and others. Encourage you to check out, of course, as many of these calls as you can. Lots and lots of great information out there. As far as I know, all of these are then recorded and available after as well. I know everybody's busy, so you can't always make it live, but these tons of great resources out there for learning and continuing your journey in Microsoft 365. So I want to thank everybody for coming on the call today. I want to thank Vardhaman, Daniel, and Ryan for doing the demos, and thank all of you for being with us here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.